take a journey back in time in search of a mystery locked beneath the sea.
Hello, welcome to the Damian and Devlin Show, and this is our review of Titanic, the 1997 film directed by James Cameron, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, Victor Garber, and Billy Zane, to name a few.
There are a lot of people in this movie.
It is. This is the big budget movie that became a international phenomenon when it was released. It looked like a movie that everybody thought was going to be a big bust. It was, at the time, the most expensive movie ever made. Only opened at $28 million, and pretty much Hollywood wrote it off. Within a week or two, it started building. Lineups started happening. Crowds started happening. And the movie turned Titanic into... It was huge. Anything Titanic became big. You know, museums would run Titanic features. Anything merchandise by Titanic, it was huge. The soundtrack was huge. Everything was huge. It was a big, phenomenal hit. Damien chose this movie because it's one of his all-time favorites, and I will pass it to you.
It's number 2. So this is number 2. It just so happens that the top 2 of my favorite movies are directed both by James Cameron.
I didn't know Dirty Dancing was directed by...
That's not one of my top favorite movies.
Sorry.
Top rated, but not one of my top favorite movies.
Couldn't resist. Sorry, couldn't resist.
Nice try. But, you know, he is going to have to start paying us money because we constantly review James Cameron.
Yeah, we're almost out. We're almost
done his full discography.
I think we're Piranha 2, The Spawning, and The Abyss. I think we're down to, pretty much.
But, so, going back to your whole Titanic mania, I grew up during that. So, it came out in 97. I was 6 years old at the time. I did not see this movie in theaters. I remember, the way I fell in love with this movie is because... I remember my grandparents getting a copy of the VHS. Now, you might remember the VHS is the big fat thing, and it had the 2 VHS like tapes in it, and literally it was split into the 2 parts of the movie, the first part and then the second part where the disaster happens. And I remember going over to their house, and just for some reason, every Saturday when I would go over there, I would watch this movie, like constantly. Sometimes I would watch one half of it, sometimes I'd watch the whole thing, but I would just constantly watch this movie. And they took note. They started buying me, and this goes into the, you could get it anywhere. I got a Transformers toy that was a Titanic. Literally, it changed into the ship, and then it was a Transformer.
So wrong.
I got, again, more pointing to the wrong, I got this little miniature Titanic toy where on the side of it where the ship hits the iceberg, there was a little puncture. So every time you put it in the bathtub, it would start to sink. I had all these Titanic toys, books. I became obsessed with it, so much so that it carried through to my adult life. And I've seen this movie, I was telling him while we were watching, I've seen this movie over 20 times, and I still love it. Everything is just fantastic. But I do have some things that I do want to point out. But historically, I know a lot about it. I've researched hours upon hours into it. Going back to 2012, which would have marked the 100-year anniversary of the sinking on April 14th, I actually had a little celebratory thing. Not celebratory, I wasn't celebrating the fact that it sunk, but I had a remembrance thing basically for it, where I watched the movie and I provided updates at that specific time. 100 years ago today, blah, 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 would have been happening, and so on and so forth. So I definitely fell victim to Titanic mania, and it still translates to my adult life today. So much so to the point where I do know that they are trying to build Titanic 2 down in Florida, and they want to have a maiden voyage. I do believe, I think I heard 2020, and I want to be on that maiden voyage. I want to be on there. Yes.
Anyhow, this movie was big. I did see it in theaters. I saw it the second weekend. My sister-in-law and brother had seen it, and they just had to show it to me. And I went to it, and I remember after it was done saying, this is going to win the Best Picture Oscar. And my sister-in-law said, yeah, it's that good. And I said, no, this is going to win it, but I don't think it's as good as people think. But this is the kind of thing Oscar like. lo and behold, Titanic actually tied winning the most Oscars, including Best Picture, and it won 11 Oscars, which I forgot. I think it tied with Ben-Hur, but don't quote me on that. But anyhow, it's it was a huge thing, and I give it its credit. It won people's hearts, and I can see why. It didn't win mine, but I don't hate the movie. So, in that, you might as well start with your positives, because you probably got a whole ton of them.
I do have a lot of them.
By the way, thank you for because he researched so much of Titanic, he shared a lot of real facts about it, which actually made it quite interesting for me.
You're very welcome.
So I do appreciate that.
And I'm going to share some of those facts with you guys, but that'll stick more to after my positives and negatives. Some of them are actually in my negatives. But going into the positives, what I have to say about this movie is it looks fantastic. The set pieces, just the way that it's filmed, some of the shots in this movie are just spectacular, breathtaking. Throwing it back to our Pearl Harbor review, we talked about how seeing some of those scenes, like when the planes were coming down, were just so beautiful, and it's so wrong at the same time that we're watching people literally die, going, oh my god, this is beautiful. The same thing happens with Titanic, especially when the ship starts to sink. There are just some beautiful shots that go on here, and it does go to show that James Cameron did do his research with regards to the sinking. Multiple accounts on how the ship actually sunk, and it was a huge controversy at the time whether or not it did sink in a certain way or it didn't sink in a certain way. And so he literally devoted portions of his life to researching the exact way that it sank, and I think we got a pretty definitive picture on how the ship went down. The soundtrack is breathtaking. I love everything about the soundtrack.
James Horner, right?
James Horner, absolutely. And I've talked about James Horner before. He's brilliant in his job. I know that they wanted to bring Enya on for this, and I don't know why at the end of the day they didn't, but they kind of replaced her and kind of mimicked her at the same time with those synthesized kind of kind of things, and I think it works perfectly. It's beautiful. Some of the songs on the soundtrack, I actually have the soundtrack, some of them just send chills down my spine because I'll be thinking of just like the scene in the movie, and some of the songs on the soundtrack of course aren't in the movie, and I'll just be thinking of like maybe like side stories in my head. And you were talking about that as well, how there's so many characters in Titanic that you wanted to see their stories. And I think that's what's good about the soundtrack, especially when you're hearing the songs that aren't in the movie. You can kind of do that and be like, oh, they're doing this right now, and this is how they're feeling. So I like that about the soundtrack. I think the acting is pretty great, especially coming from two shout-outs here. One to Leonardo DiCaprio, definitely. I think this is one of his very first roles. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think he did a couple.
But this was the one that made him big.
Absolutely.
And this was the first movie that I ever saw him in as a kid, and I instantly fell in love with him. Fun fact about me, Leonardo DiCaprio is actually my favorite actor, and this movie had a lot to do with that. So I have to shout out to him. He does a fantastic job, in my opinion. As well as I have to shout out to Billy Zane. And I actually think that Billy Zane is really underrated as an actor overall. And he's actually my favorite character in this movie, and I'll explain why later. But he just does a really great job, and a lot of people paint him as the villain in this movie, and if you really look at it in a specific way, he's not. He's just a guy reacting to things in a completely reasonable way. Sure, he gets mad, sure, he goes kind of like nuts at one point, but based on everything that's happening and the stressful situations, I think he reacts perfectly, and I have to give him a shout out for that. As well, I do love the romance in this. I know you have problems with it and you're going to talk about it, but I love the romance in it. I think it's beautiful. I think it's just a story of two people, kind of like Romeo and Juliet, two different styles, and they come together and they find a way. Of course, there's always going to be controversy about the way that the romance comes to an end, and we're probably not going to deal into how that happens because it is major spoiler territory, but just overall during the whole ship and the meeting and coming together and doing things for one another, I think it's beautiful. And I do have to also say that the script is very well done. From beginning to end, I'm on the edge of my seat with this movie. Coming from the beginning where we're meeting Old Rose to her telling her tale, I think it's all wonderful. Go ahead. What do you think?
Basically, James Cameron, I think, should get credit because he did do a lot of research, and I like that. He's an incredible filmmaker, I won't deny that. He does some amazing shots, I will give you that. Some great filming of it. And stuff. You okay?
Sorry about
He's
that.
choked up from the movie.
I'm
He's
just so
You
choked
okay?
up. The
You'll be
romance.
okay.
It was so beautiful. It's got me. Continue.
But
please.
anyhow, no, James Cameron has some amazing shots in this. The visuals of the actual Titanic, like as he said, you're not supposed to be thinking how beautiful it looks, but it does. He did a remarkable job with all that, and just little set pieces to the clothes they wore, to like paying tribute to everything. You can tell he was really obsessed with this movie, and I love that he was, because it was really, you can really see it in every aspect. I don't look at anything and say it really looks dated. Like the actual stuff on the Titanic looks timeless, and that's great.
I think that, so going off of that, I think that's because he used practical effects for the most part. There's very little use of CGI in this, so much so to the point where they actually built the replica of the Titanic in like I guess a pool or something that they have in Hollywood, and broke it apart and literally sank it. So I think that's why it looks so timeless.
And James Horner's score, I will agree with you, is actually one of the most amazing scores. I also love the Celine Dion song. And I love that they hint that song all the way through the movie, because it is the theme, and then that they put lyrics to it was quite nice. Because you hear this melody all the way through it, and then when you actually hear the song, and it's as powerful as the melody, it's great. I know some people hate My Heart Goes On, but I actually think it is a great song, and I think it was worthy of winning the Oscar that year. That's my positives.
Really?
Yeah.
That's it?
That's pretty much
okay.
it. Yeah.
Well, I am going to get into basically historical inaccuracies with my negatives. So
That's
why don't
what you do.
Why don't you go first with
Okay.
yours?
My negatives, I'll try to keep them quite tight. The script is an absolute mess. The screenplay is horrible. Some of the dialogue sounds like, I've heard better dialogue on like a CW teen show. And it's just, I find it's really sloppy from how some of it I like how they go from current day to other day, but it comes back and forth. Some, like visually when they go into it, he does it great. But sometimes I find it really sloppy when they're talking. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but you don't bring a 101-year-old woman on a boat, okay? You don't take her out into the ocean. There's no need for that. That's just stupid writing. I also don't like the love triangle in this movie because I didn't buy the romance, and that's the screenplay's fault. I didn't buy the romance, and I feel that James Cameron felt the romance wasn't strong because Billy Zane's character, I agree with you, Billy Zane's actually pretty good, but he gets darker and darker, and I feel it's because they don't feel strong on what they have with Kate and Leo. And I feel that, like, he starts off like he's doing them a favor. He's marrying. You can tell all through this movie he has feelings for Rose.
He does.
And then he starts losing it to the point where it's almost cartoonish, where he's running around the boat with guns and stuff.
That is, like I said to you while we watched this, that is a legitimate response. He's angry. He's upset. The ship is literally sinking around him.
You're not running around with a gun when you're worrying about trying to get survival.
He's so confident in the fact that he can get off that ship and make a deal that he can take time to go kill Leo.
To me, it's bad writing because of the fact that you don't have faith in your romance. And so you have to get your... Because I think I was still rooting for Billy Zane in some ways. And then I kept saying, why do they keep making him worse and worse? Like,
But he's not a bad guy.
But they
He's
make
not.
him that way. I bet you took a poll. Most people would say he's the villain in this.
That's
and
true.
I don't think he is at the start.
He's not a villain at all throughout this movie. He's
But
reasonably reacting to it.
When
in my
they
opinion.
realize that I don't like romances where you force the third person to have to become total evil. But we'll move on from that. I'm not a fan of that. And again, this is screenplay again. I think they could have done this movie with Bill Paxton's character just interested in learning about Titanic. The fact that he's only motivated by finding this necklace is absolutely, absolutely wrong. I don't like it. It's like I'm just there for the financial gain. And I don't know. I know they're trying to say something with the movie, but they don't really ever say it. And I just think it's just wrong. And we'll get to another plot point that I had an issue with, but we'll break it up. Because one of my favorite performances in this movie is Gloria Stewart. Her as... It's a spoiler.
It's not a spoiler.
She's older Rose.
I already said she was old Rose.
Okay, so anyhow, wonderful performance. Back to the plot. I'm going back to the plot now because one of my big problems with this screenplay is two things. Number one, I automatically know Rose is going to survive because she's on the boat at 100 years old. And number two, there's an actual sequence where Bill Paxton shows her on computer. They show her how the boat went down. Now, it's for the audience because she obviously lived it. She knows what happened. But the fact that I don't, I'll admit it, I didn't know much about Titanic and I was anxious to learn. But the fact that they go through and the boat breaks in half and then it's going to go up and then it's going to come down, it was like somebody actually decided to tell me the whole ending of the story, and we know one of the people that make it. Why would you put that in a script? So basically I have a checklist. Yep, there it goes. That happened. Like, they don't even try to make it seem like it's not going to be different. You know, obviously it's more harrowing. The romance I did have a big problem with. And rewatching this is about my fourth time watching this. I have to say, I think the leads are not good. I love both these actors. Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. I love Leo. And you know, when I used to review this movie and people asked me about Titanic, I would say that I actually liked Leo. And I thought Kate Winslet was miscast. I just don't like the character of Rose. And we'll get to that. The whole character. Even parts when Gloria Stewart plays her. I don't like the character Rose. I think she's spoiled, and I think she comes off as a teenager when they need her to be a teenager and comes off as an old lady when she's not an old lady. Like, it's just really sloppy writing. But when I watched this again, I kept thinking, you know what? I think I'm changing my mind. I think Kate Winslet is actually not horrible, but I think Leo is so badly cast in this.
What?
Yeah, there is no chemistry between them whatsoever.
Did you watch the same movie that I did?
I have seen it, and I guess as a kid, seeing it over and over again,
you
saw magic that was there that I don't see. I do not see any spark between them. They're together for like 2 days, and I just feel like he's an escape for her. And it's ironic kind of how it all plays out because she escapes him. But again, the Rose character drives me crazy because, you know, she's at her desperate end and wants to end it all by the end. And then as her story goes through, that totally goes away. Even though she loses the one thing that made her want to live, she totally throws that away. She's so flighty in so many parts. There's a part that she's totally in love with Jack, and then he's suspected of something, and on her face you can think, did he do it? Like, she shouldn't even be questioning him at that point. Like, not at all. But she is. Why? Because of the bad script. Now, I'm going to blame the bad script on most, because I know Leo is a phenomenal actor.
She's doubting him because she's surrounded by people that she knows. As well, you have to remember, she's 17 years old, right? So when a 17-year-old person is placed in this kind of position, tending to doubt what's going on. That's why she's acting that way. She's playing her part perfectly. She's being realistic with her responses.
Well, that's how you got it. I don't get it
if she were like a 25-year-old, maybe 30-year-old person.
She looked like a 25, 30-year-old playing against 15-year-old Leonardo, and you told me...
That's not her fault. That's a casting problem, and Hollywood does that with all kinds of teenagers.
This is a huge casting problem. But going on to Rose, and I'll end it with this so I don't go on too much. The old lady Rose, I absolutely love. And then at the very end of the movie. Now, this is a spoiler, so if you haven't seen it, mute or something, pause, or go la 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 la, because I have to get this off my chest, because this is huge to me. At the very end, we know that Bill Paxton's looking for this necklace that they mention all through the movie. and you don't know where it is, and then it's revealed that Rose has had it for the last 80 years of her life. And she decides that she's going to throw it into the ocean. My problem with this stays so true that I can't believe Rose is just as selfish as an old lady as she is as a thing. I don't think she should give it to Bill Paxton. But you're telling me that Rose never thought of actually selling that and maybe giving some of the proceeds, because they claim this thing is valuable. How about the survivors, those kids that survived, that lost their parents on the Titanic? At any time, if she didn't want that money or didn't even want her family to have that money, why did she not sell it? And she could have done so much good for the people that survived. It's shown how many kids, how many widows were on there. And I can't look at somebody who's so selfish who says, I'm just going to hide this for 80 years so I can throw it in the thing. She doesn't care for anybody, including Jack, on that boat. I can't invest in a character like that. Sorry. Give me your historical facts. That's a big leap for me. Why would you not use that for good?
So we're still in spoiler territory here, but there's an alternate ending that I showed him as well, and she kind of explains why she held on to it in the alternate ending.
But it's still not enough to say why you wouldn't help children and stuff, because she's selfish.
She is selfish in it, but she basically says, why didn't I ever sell it is because every time I thought I was going to, I thought of Cal, who's Billy Zane's character. So she didn't want to end up like him, but going off
she
of
didn't
what
have to keep
you
the money,
said, yes, she didn't have to keep the money, but she's too selfish to realize that. I'll agree with that. Spoilers done for the time being. Going on to my negatives, there's one thing that always takes me out of this movie. It's when we think that Jack and Rose are never going to see each other again, and then Rose changes her mind and goes to find him. We're facing her, and behind her is the ship. And when you look at the ship behind her, you'll see people walking and just pretending like it's a normal night. But I can tell it's a set piece because there's supposed to be windows there, and they are very clearly painted on. And the wall itself doesn't look like iron, like the Titanic was made out of. It doesn't look like wood. It literally just looks like paper mache painted over real quick. And it always takes me out. And I think that whole portion just like really rips me right out. As well, I do have to touch on the historical inaccuracy with one major scene. And I know the family of this person even went so far as to sue James Cameron because it's such a huge creative liberty that he took and nobody knows why. So spoiler again, so pause again, but I have to get this off my chest. But there's a character named William Murdoch. He's the first officer of the Titanic. Basically means that he's the second in charge if something were to happen to Captain Smith. And in real life, he's regarded as a hero, so much so that he would help people get into lifeboats that have been capsized and so on and so forth. He did ultimately pass in the sinking. Many don't know how, but it's assumed that he drowned or died of exposure in the water. Now in the movie, he shoots himself in the head after shooting one of the characters, which never happened. And I don't know why Cameron thought that was a good idea, especially knowing that this is a real historical figure and he is regarded as a hero. So I don't know why he did it, and it pisses me off every time I see that scene because I like Murdoch. He does everything that he can to try to save as many people in the movie and then just suddenly starts shooting people and kills himself. So that bothers me. And that is the biggest historical inaccuracy that I have.
It's huge.
It is major. And like I said, the family of that character went on to actually sue, and I think they won the case, if I'm not mistaken.
It's kind of weird that, like you said, why would James Cameron even do that? Because he's so particular about the nuances of what...
I don't know if that was like a him decision, if it was a producer decision to add more drama to the sinking, but I mean, you've got a ship that's literally sinking and killing people as it's doing so, so I don't think there needed to be any unnecessary drama.
Sharks.
Yeah, this guy kept going on about sharks. He's like, when we saw all the people in the water, he's like, dun-dum, dun-dum.
I just thought sharks might help.
So I'm going to continue into spoiler territory here, although albeit slightly. And I do want to apologize for all the spoilers here.
This is a hard movie
it's a hard movie not to, but this has to do with my favorite character, Cal, who's played by Billy Zane. So like he went on, it's portrayed like he's supposed to be the villain in this movie. And I'm going to do my best to try to convince you that he's really not, to maybe look at his character in a different light. But all throughout the movie, he's playing who he is. He's this upper class, rich guy that thinks he owns the world. He thinks literally it's his oyster and he can do with it what he wants. He treats the third-class passengers, Jack mostly, with contempt. And that's not unlike any of the other rich characters in the movie. That does not immediately make him a villain. He is a gentleman, so much so that when Jack's invited to dinner, and you even called him charming at this point, he lets Jack escort Rose to dinner and escorts Rose's mom himself. Whereas if he really were a villain, he'd have said, like, don't touch her, she's mine, and made like this big old like my property kind of deal. But he didn't. He was a gentleman about it. He even invited Jack to go have dinner with all of them. He constantly was trying to throw money at Jack all the time, but here comes this guy trying to steal his fiancée. So obviously he's going to get a little pissed about that. He snaps at one point and tries to kill Jack, and I think that's the biggest problem that you have with him. Which, you know what, yeah, sure, it's extreme, but with all that's going on, I still think it's just a thing where he snaps and he's stressed, and you know what? He just acted. And people just act sometimes, and they don't think about the consequences or the repercussions. Now, going back to why I don't think he's a villain, after all of that, he actually saves a boatload of people, and nobody notices. If you ask one good thing that he does in this movie, nobody notices that not only does he save a little girl's life, sure, it's a slimy thing that he does, but he saves that girl's life. As well, he gets into that lifeboat and saves everybody in that lifeboat's life. You see him constantly pushing other people off that are going to tip it and swamp it and make it capsize. He saves them. And when everything's said and done, you see him. He's sitting there, huddled together with the rest of the people, and there's about 20 people on that boat, and those are 20 lives that he saved. And he did do it himself, because you see it. At one point, he's standing on it, and he's pushing it back down into a floating position. He's a hero, and nobody treats him like a hero.
See, if Billy Zane's watching this, please contact Damien with a thank you.
I'm going to be your agent, Mr. Zane. Like, I will make you a star again. But,
your defense of Billy Zane, I am fine with, because I agree with a lot of what you say, but it does kind of say that you like Jack and stuff, but it kind of puts Jack down, because Jack saves one person.
I do like Jack, but
one person.
I just cannot stand that people just instantly paint Billy Zane's character as a villain.
It's because the script.
I get
script
that,
writing.
but you know what? That's it. That's my only negative. Spoilers are done now. Now. That is it. For me, for my negatives. I did want to talk about some historical fun facts about the Titanic. So a lot of the things in this movie are actually very, very accurate. So much so, like the CQD, the way that Captain Smith acts when it's like the Titanic hits the iceberg, everything, like that's all accurate. Especially, of course, we all know the absolute catastrophe, the fact that they didn't have enough lifeboats. But fun fact about it is, nearby, when the Titanic starts shooting up the fireworks, or the flares, I should say, the flares. There was actually a ship nearby that could actually visually see the flares, but they had stopped for the night and were not moving because of all the ice that was in the area. Now, they could have gone to the Titanic and saved a lot of people, but they chose not to. And so that's a fun fact for you, so next time you think about it.
Let's go with fact. Fun doesn't seem like right for people dying.
As well, there's actually a huge conspiracy theory, and go look this up when you're done. But there's a huge conspiracy theory that the Titanic actually never sank. It was her sister ship, the Olympic, that sank. And it's all this big conspiracy theory about how insurance fraud and things like that. And there's also conspiracy theories that the ship was sunk on purpose for that insurance fraud. Definitely go look it up. It's really super interesting. I do not believe those conspiracy theories personally. As well, if only to just foreshadow, this could only happen in real life. But when the Titanic left port for the very first time, she almost collided with another ship. Actually, I did think she did collide with the other ship and damage the other one, and they had to stop. and then it was delayed. This could only happen to the Titanic, but then they took off again. But yeah, she actually collided with a ship like 10 minutes after she left port. So another fun fact for you. I'm full of Titanic information. If you ever want to ask me, feel free, go right ahead. But that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Final thoughts?
Before I give my rating, another part of the script that I really didn't like is that Jack and Rose seem to show up at every major thing that happens to the Titanic. Like, they literally see the iceberg. They're right on the deck when the iceberg hits. They're there when they see, they've met Molly Brown several times. They're there. So many things happen. I wanted to say that it won 11 Academy Awards. It was up for 14. But I can't be the only person in Hollywood who thought this was a crappy script. Titanic, here's a fun fact. Titanic is one of 7 movies that won, 7 movies that won Best Picture without getting nominated for a Screenplay Award. I'm not saying didn't get nominated.
Yeah, give me a break.
Didn't get nominated. I'm saying they didn't get a nomination and they won Best Picture. Happened only 7 times. Titanic was the last time it happened. I don't think it's a great script. And you know what? I'm going to be generous because there is a lot I like. There's a lot of stories that I kept saying, I'd like to see that story. I'd like to see that story. That old couple at bed. I want to see that story.
I think it should be made into a miniseries. It'd be a great miniseries.
And because I say that way too much, I'm going to have to just split my vote in half and give this a 2.5 out of 5.
Oh my god.
2.5. I think it's an overrated movie, and I think there's better love stories, there's better disaster films, and James Cameron has given us much better films. But I do like some of it, so 2.5.
I'm offended. But I'm going to give this movie 4.5. It definitely gives 4.5. I would have given it a 5 if not for the historical inaccuracy, the big glaring one that I mentioned, because that really, really just takes me out of it, especially considering what I know about the ship and the reality behind it. So I do have to give it a 4.5. Otherwise, it's a beautiful movie. It's beautiful. It's fun. It basically pulls you in. So I'll end this off with a fun fact about me, but at the very end of it, I'm not going to say what happens, because I've already said enough spoilers here, but the very, very end of the movie, right before the credits, that's my vision of heaven. I think that when you die, that you go back to the time where you were most happy, and you're surrounded by all the people that you love and care about and want to have there, and then it's just a grand old time. They welcome you, and that's what my opinion is of heaven. So the ending of this movie always gets me. Just like the ending of these reviews always gets me. We hate leaving you, but there's always more to come, so make sure you subscribe. Stay tuned, because we do have something special coming up really soon in July. We'll get more into that later as we get closer. Comment, what do you think about Titanic? Do you love the ship? Do you love the movie like I do? Or would you have rather gone on the sister ship Olympic like this guy? Let us know. We always want to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you next time.
This is it!